January 17, 1943, a bitter wind swept across the snow-choked fields of Eastern Europe. The horizon was broken by the jagged silhouettes of Panzer IV tanks, their tracks crunching over frozen mud, engines rumbling like distant thunder. Somewhere ahead, a lone gunner crouched behind the skeletal remains of a destroyed farmhouse, eyes fixed on the advancing column. The world seemed to shrink to the narrow line of steel rolling toward him, each tank a fortress of iron and fire. He adjusted his aim, hands numb from the cold, and waited for the perfect moment. Seconds felt like hours. The battlefield was silent, save for the wind and the faint clatter of tank treads. One miscalculation, and the machine guns, cannons, and armored monstrosities would overrun him. But this was no ordinary soldier. He had a plan, a technique born of observation, patience, and deadly precision. In under 10 minutes, he would do the unthinkable, immobilize an entire Panzer company, and turn the momentum of this engagement on its head. In early 1943, the Eastern Front had become a frozen crucible of attrition. The German Wehrmacht, stretched thin after the disaster at Stalingrad, sought to regain initiative in the southern sector of the Soviet Union. The Red Army, battered but resilient, had begun to exploit every weakness from supply lines to reconnaissance errors in a campaign that demanded ingenuity as much as firepower. In this unforgiving winter landscape, every hill, forest edge, and abandoned village became a potential ambush site. Armored warfare dominated the engagements. Panzer divisions, with their Panzer III and Panzer IV models, were still considered the backbone of German offensive capability. These tanks were heavily armored, well-armed, and coordinated with infantry and artillery to strike swiftly and decisively. Yet the vast expanses of snow-laden terrain created vulnerabilities. Axe sank into soft mud beneath the frozen crust. Flanking maneuvers slowed, and mechanical failures became frequent under extreme cold. Commanders began to rely on meticulous route planning, but even then, one small oversight could be catastrophic. Among the Soviet defenses, anti-tank gunners were becoming increasingly sophisticated. Training emphasized observation, target prioritization, and exploiting mechanical weaknesses rather than brute force. Officers instructed their men to study the enemy's movements, identify patterns, and recognize the critical points where a strike could yield disproportionate results. Winter camouflage, decoys, and field engineering became as important as shells and ammunition. These soldiers were not merely reacting, they were calculating, predicting, and waiting for the precise moment to act. It was within this environment of tension, preparation, and adaptation that one gunner would emerge as an example of tactical innovation. He was not the fastest, nor the strongest, nor the most heavily armed. What set him apart was his understanding of the enemy's machinery, its limitations and susceptibilities, and the courage to exploit them under fire. The stage was set: frozen fields, advancing armor, and a single operator who could turn the course of battle in minutes. By January 1943, the German 24th Panzer Division was advancing cautiously through the open steppe near the Don River, unaware that the Soviet forces had begun implementing increasingly effective countermeasures. Reconnaissance had spotted the column moving along a narrow track, but snowstorms and drifting fog masked the full extent of the terrain's hazards. Supply lines creaked under the strain of winter, and even minor mechanical failures could halt entire units. Every tank that faltered risked exposing the ones behind it to ambush or immobilization. The gunner in question was assigned to a modest anti-tank team armed with a 45mm field gun. Though small in caliber compared to the Panzer IV's frontal armor, the gun could exploit weak points, particularly tracks and exposed suspension components. Months of observing German maneuvers had taught him that the vast majority of tank losses came not from direct hits to the hull, but from disruptions in mobility. A disabled track rendered even the most formidable Panzer immobile, vulnerable to follow-up attacks or artillery fire. The technique he would employ, later dubbed track separation, relied entirely on this principle. Winter conditions compounded the challenge. Snow and ice muffled movement, but also created unique advantages. Tanks, heavy and rigid, left deep impressions in soft snow, guiding the gunner's line of sight. The terrain funneled armored columns along predictable paths, limiting their ability to maneuver. Meanwhile, the gunner's unit had scouted and prepared firing positions, using ruined structures and ridges to conceal themselves. Communication was minimal. Any sound could alert the enemy to their location. Patience and precision were crucial. This was a war of calculation as much as of firepower. Every decision, every aimed shot carried weight far beyond the individual. The Panzer column, confident and methodical, did not anticipate that a single, well-placed operator could immobilize it within minutes. The battlefield had narrowed to a single moment of opportunity, the right shot, at the right time, in the right location. From these frozen fields and cautious preparations, the moment of action was about to unfold, a moment that would define the ingenuity and deadly precision of one gunner and alter the immediate course of this engagement. The gas. First angle is human. The gunner was a product of relentless training and personal resilience. Months in freezing trenches, nights spent observing enemy movements through binoculars, and constant maintenance of his weapon forged a soldier whose mind was as sharp as his aim. Fear was ever present, but it was tempered by focus. Each time he adjusted his sights or calculated range, he was not simply firing at machines. He was confronting the human element behind the armored hulls, drivers, gunners, commanders, whose lives depended on their tank's mobility. The psychological tension of knowing one miscalculation could be fatal heightened his awareness. Every breath, every heartbeat became part of the rhythm of observation and preparation. From a tactical perspective, his positioning exploited the terrain's natural advantages. The frozen steppe limited German maneuvering and funneled tanks along predictable paths. By choosing a defilade position behind a shattered farmhouse, the gunner created a controlled killing zone. He studied the column's formation, noting distances between vehicles and calculating the sequence in which he could strike to maximize disruption. Precision, not volume of fire, was the key. One carefully aimed shot at the right track could paralyze the lead tank, forcing the rest to halt, stack up, and become vulnerable. In essence, the battlefield itself became an extension of his strategy. Technologically, the track separation technique leveraged both limitations and strengths. The Panzer IV, though formidable in armor and armament, had exposed suspension components. A 45mm round, insufficient against the frontal armor, could sever a track link or damage a road wheel. The gunner's intimate knowledge of these vulnerabilities transformed a small-caliber gun into a decisive weapon. Observation of previous encounters, experience with mechanical failures, and understanding the physics of armor penetration informed every decision. Technology and human ingenuity converged, allowing a single man to outmatch an entire company of tanks. Leadership played a subtle yet crucial role. The gunner's officers had instilled a doctrine of patience, observation, and initiative. Trusting their men to act independently in critical moments encouraged innovation. Without orders from above, the gunner could exploit his understanding of enemy movements, terrain, and mechanical weaknesses. This autonomy, rare in many frontline units, made the difference between reactive defense and proactive disruption. The enemy angle reveals the Germans' confidence and inherent vulnerabilities. The 24th Panzer Division had advanced with a sense of routine. Experienced crews trusted their armor and coordinated movements to blunt Soviet resistance, yet their reliance on mechanical perfection created blind spots. The German tanks were heavily armored from the front, but mobility was a constant Achilles heel. Tracks, road wheels, and suspension systems, though robust, were exposed to precise anti-tank fire. The gunner recognized that even disciplined crews could not instantly react when lead vehicles were disabled, and any pause in movement would ripple down the column, creating bottlenecks and confusion. From a moral perspective, the engagement was starkly asymmetrical. One man faced dozens of heavily armed vehicles, each manned by trained soldiers. The ethical weight of targeting mobility rather than human life, striking tracks instead of hulls, underscored a brutal logic of wartime strategy. Disabling a tank could save lives, preventing direct assaults on infantry, yet it also exposed the human fragility behind the armor. The gunner's decision to exploit a weakness in machinery rather than risk indiscriminate destruction reflects a calculated, morally nuanced approach to survival and duty. Logistics and environmental considerations further shaped the outcome. The frozen terrain, deep snow, and narrow corridors limited German maneuverability, while the Soviets exploited every ridge, hollow, and ruined building. Ammunition was scarce and precious. Each round had to count. The gunner's understanding of this delicate balance ensured that no shot was wasted, and every impact contributed to a cascading disruption of the enemy column. He worked not only against tanks, but against the very environment in which they operated. Psychologically, the gunner manipulated perception as much as physical targets. By waiting for the column to advance into the prepared kill zone, he instilled hesitation, confusion, and frustration among the German crews. One immobilized tank could convince others to overcompensate, accelerating mistakes. In effect, he turned fear and uncertainty into a force multiplier, demonstrating that battlefield advantage is often as mental as it is mechanical. Ultimately, these angles, human resilience, tactical ingenuity, technological exploitation, leadership autonomy, enemy vulnerability, moral precision, environmental mastery, and psychological manipulation, intertwined to set the stage. They converged seamlessly in a single decisive moment that would soon unfold on the frozen plains where the gunner's skill would transform theory into immediate, devastating action. It was 10:35 hours when the first Panzer IV crested the shallow rise, engines whining against the icy crust. The gunner's gloved hands tightened on the breech of his 45mm field gun. Through the sight, he tracked the lead vehicle, noting the glint of sunlight off its tracks, the rhythm of its treads as they bit into the snow. Seconds stretched, each one a small eternity, as the column continued its slow advance, unaware of the trap awaiting them. At precisely 10:37 hours, he fired the first round. The shell struck the right track of the lead tank, severing a critical link. The vehicle shuddered violently, then ground to a halt, smoke curling from its suspension. The tanks behind, tightly spaced, slammed on brakes and swerved, creating a stack-up of armored vehicles. Confusion spread instantly. Radio chatter crackled with frustration and disjointed commands. Some crews attempted to reverse, others sought flanking routes through frozen ditches, but the narrow path offered no escape. Within 3 minutes, the gunner had engaged the second and third tanks, each shot striking the suspension or track. The effect was exponential. Immobilized lead tanks caused collisions, blocked retreat, and prevented the following panzers from deploying their guns effectively. German commanders realized too late that they were caught in a controlled kill zone. Artillery observers in the rear requested guidance, but the fog and smoke from stalled engines hindered coordination. By 10:45 hours, 10 minutes after the first shot, the entire company of 12 Panzer IVs had been immobilized. Some tanks had minor engine failures exacerbated by collisions. Others were physically trapped by the snow and frozen ground. The gunner's focus never wavered. Each round was deliberate, calculated, exploiting weak points he had studied in the weeks prior. His team adjusted fire to target the most critical tracks, ensuring no single tank could escape unscathed. The battlefield, once a narrow corridor of armored confidence, had been transformed into a chaotic tableau of smoke, bent metal, and stalled engines. The gunner's patience, observation, and precision turned theoretical principles into immediate reality. In less than 10 minutes, a single operator had neutralized the mobility of an entire panzer company, halting the German advance and shifting the initiative to the Soviet defenders. As the last tank came to a halt, the gunner allowed himself a brief glance at the scene. The frozen fields were littered with stalled engines, twisted tracks, and the hiss of escaping steam. German crews scrambled to assess damage, panic rising as they realized movement was impossible. Radios crackled with urgent reports, but coordination had broken down. The gunner knew that in these few critical minutes, the momentum of the engagement had irrevocably shifted. From the German perspective, the attack was a stark lesson in vulnerability. Commanders documented the incident later in war diaries, noting how a single, well-placed weapon could paralyze a unit more effectively than frontal assaults or massed artillery. Engineers rushed to repair tracks under fire, but the conditions made rapid recovery nearly impossible. The immobilized tanks became temporary shelters, their crews vulnerable to observation, artillery, and follow-up attacks. The frozen ground compounded their helplessness. Even small obstacles became insurmountable barriers for the heavy vehicles. Meanwhile, the gunner maintained situational awareness, scanning the flanks and rear. He anticipated potential counterattacks and was prepared to exploit any movement. The precision and timing of his fire had forced the Germans into a defensive posture, transforming their advance into a series of isolated, stalled positions. Overhead, reconnaissance aircraft circled, documenting the stalled column, unaware that one man had orchestrated the entire scenario. Within 20 minutes, Soviet infantry began moving to capitalize on the disruption. Engineers and artillery units were dispatched to secure the kill zone, while the gunner's anti-tank team repositioned to maintain pressure on the immobilized vehicles. German commanders attempted to reorganize, but the cohesion of the Panzer Company had been shattered. One by one, tanks were systematically disabled or trapped, creating a cascading failure that exemplified the effectiveness of targeted mobility disruption. By 1100 hours, the battlefield had been decisively reshaped. 12 tanks, a full Panzer company, lay immobilized, their crews exposed and vulnerable. A single gunner, armed with patience, skill, and intimate knowledge of enemy mechanics, had demonstrated the devastating potential of tactical ingenuity. The moment was brief, yet its effects resonated far beyond the 10 minutes of fire, setting the stage for strategic follow-up actions that would exploit the enemy's immobilization and signal a profound lesson in the art of armored warfare. The immediate aftermath of the engagement was a mixture of shock, confusion, and calculated exploitation. German reports later described the immobilization of the Panzer Company as unexpected and demoralizing, highlighting how a single anti-tank team could halt a coordinated armored advance. Soviet commanders quickly recognized the tactical opportunity. Infantry units advanced along the frozen corridor, securing abandoned vehicles and capturing stranded crews. Artillery units, guided by observers, targeted positions around the stalled tanks, further compounding the German losses. Casualty reports indicated that while direct fatalities were limited, many crews had survived inside immobilized tanks. The operational impact was severe. The company's mobility was destroyed, and the mechanical damage to tracks, road wheels, and suspensions required hours to repair, if at all. Supplies intended for the offensive were delayed, and the momentum of the German advance was irreversibly disrupted. Field engineers faced near-impossible conditions, forced to contend with snow, ice, and enemy observation as they attempted repairs. The engagement quickly became a case study in Soviet tactical innovation. Officers highlighted the importance of observation, patience, and precise targeting, demonstrating that one well-prepared gunner could neutralize a disproportionate threat. The track separation technique, although born of necessity, emphasized exploiting vulnerabilities rather than engaging in brute force attacks. Manuals and training programs incorporated these lessons, teaching anti-tank teams to focus on mobility disruption, terrain advantage, and psychological impact rather than solely relying on direct armor penetration. From a human perspective, the gunner and his team received commendations for their skill and composure under pressure. Their actions exemplified the combination of technical knowledge, courage, and strategic foresight that could influence entire operations. It also reinforced a critical understanding that warfare on the Eastern Front was as much about ingenuity and anticipation as it was about firepower. Soldiers, mechanics, and commanders alike began to reevaluate assumptions about armored superiority, realizing that tactical awareness could overturn numerical and technological advantages. The frozen battlefield, once dominated by advancing German armor, had been transformed into a tableau of stalled machines and tense calculations. The immediate consequences, halted movement, operational paralysis, and increased vulnerability, would ripple across the sector, influencing both short-term decisions and broader strategic planning. In the hours following the engagement, the broader implications of the gunners' actions became clear. German units in adjacent sectors reported delays and disruptions as news of the immobilized Panzer Company spread quickly. Reinforcements were diverted to assist, stretching resources thin and forcing command to reconsider their operational timetable. The Eastern Front, already a landscape of attrition and harsh winter conditions, now demonstrated how a single tactical event could influence multiple units and shift the tempo of a larger offensive. Repair teams labored under extreme conditions. Frozen ground, snowdrifts, and ongoing enemy observations slowed recovery efforts. Some tanks were eventually freed, but several remained trapped or damaged beyond immediate repair. The psychological effect on German crews was profound. Confidence in maneuver superiority was shaken. Crews who survived the incident described a pervasive sense of vulnerability. Steel armor was formidable but not invincible, and mobility was a critical, fragile advantage. The gunners' precision attack had proven that even elite panzer units could be rendered helpless in minutes. Soviet strategists seized the advantage decisively. Infantry and mechanized units moved to exploit the immobilized tanks, capturing positions and pressing the attack. Reports noted the gunners' ability to immobilize the company had bought essential time for coordination and reinforcement. This brief window altered the operational landscape, demonstrating the disproportionate effect of targeted action on mechanized formations. Commanders emphasized that training and observation, terrain exploitation, and weak point targeting could yield results exceeding conventional expectations. Historically, this engagement was later cited in military studies as a clear example of asymmetric anti-armor tactics. The track separation approach influenced training across multiple Soviet divisions, reinforcing the value of precision, patience, and terrain mastery. Lessons drawn from this incident highlighted that even technologically superior forces were vulnerable to calculated disruption, and that human skill, ingenuity, and foresight could outweigh brute mechanical advantage. By the day's end, the battlefield was a testament to controlled chaos, immobilized tanks, stranded crews, and a renewed Soviet presence. The immediate victory was tactical, yet its resonance extended far beyond. A demonstration that warfare was not solely determined by numbers or armor, but by those capable of observing, calculating, and striking with precision at the decisive point. The frozen plains had borne witness to a moment where intellect, skill, and courage prevailed over overwhelming mechanical force. In the quiet that followed, the battlefield seemed almost still, as if the frozen plains themselves were absorbing the weight of what had occurred. One gunner, armed with knowledge, patience, and precise skill, had transformed a narrow tactical moment into a lasting lesson in armored warfare. Mobility, not firepower, had proven to be the decisive factor. The immobilized Panzer Company was more than a tactical success. It was a reminder that even the most formidable machines were only as effective as the terrain, planning, and human oversight allowed. This incident illuminated the intersection of human ingenuity and technology. Soldiers learned that understanding the enemy's strengths and weaknesses, combined with careful observation and patience, could amplify limited resources into decisive outcomes. It demonstrated the fragility of confidence built solely on mechanical superiority, and how courage and intellect could exploit even minor vulnerabilities with catastrophic effect. Beyond immediate battlefield results, the event resonated strategically. Commanders, engineers, and infantry across both sides reconsidered the role of mobility, terrain, and targeted disruption. Manuals, training programs, and operational doctrine evolved, emphasizing precision over brute force. The Eastern Front, long defined by attrition and overwhelming firepower, had revealed that ingenuity could redirect the momentum of battle in unexpected ways. Ultimately, the story of the track separation technique is more than a tactical anecdote. It is a testament to the power of observation, decisiveness, and human skill under pressure. In 10 minutes, a single gunner had altered the fate of an armored company, proving that warfare is not only measured in tonnage and numbers, but in the clarity of thought, courage, and foresight applied at the decisive moment. Even amidst the chaos of global conflict, moments of human precision could leave an indelible mark on history. The frozen plains would remember, as would military scholars. Sometimes, one mind, one weapon, and one well-placed shot could change everything.